Добрий день. Сьогодні в Українському кризовому медіа-центрі формат «Геополітичні діалоги». Я вітаю і вдячний тим, хто присутній. Сьогодні багато учасників. І тим, хто дивиться нас і подивляться після запису в YouTube.
So today we have the topic, which is caused by the great interest, and I would even say the international attention. And traditionally, it draws attention of many people all around the world and also in Ukraine. That is the topic of the nuclear threats and nuclear weapons. That is a topic of the utmost interest at the moment, and I have invited today Yuriy Kostenko, the person who, I would say, the best expert nowadays, with the experience in these processes and also with the knowledge which is generalizing today. So as the author of the depth analysis of Ukraine nuclear weapon, which was published in Harvard and in English, and also I would like to draw attention to this fact because I think that we need to know more about this book with these scientific work, not on the level of the discussion of the experts, because the expert discussion is in place, and we also had the presentation of this book here, and also 2 editions, but on the level of the management, on the level of the state service. And I think that that should be the book which should be on the table of the people who are working on the issues of the nuclear weapons, and also those who prepare the speeches of the president of Ukraine, those who are advising the president of Ukraine, and they should be the ones who, this is something that should be on the table of the Ukrainian ambassadors, because, and also the international experts, because they have to understand that our conclusions are based on the previous assessments. So quite often we are implementing something new. We think that there was nothing in place before that, and but when we learn our history, we learn on our mistakes, and that is something that is quite often forgotten. So now I'm introducing you, Mr. Yuriy, not as the Minister of the Environment of Ukraine and as a political actor. I know that you are very active in this area, but I want to focus not even on the book we have discussed, the history of nuclear disarmament of Ukraine, not only on the topics which are, I would say, even mistakes we had before, even though we have to assess them as well, because we didn't assess that till the end, the nuclear disarmament, the Budapest memorandum and its inefficiency on what should be done. There are lots of things to discuss, but today I would like to focus on today. And in my opinion, nuclear threats from the enemy of Ukraine, from the Russian Federation, from time to time we can hear them, and we hear that all the time, but nevertheless there are some phases where these threats are in the acute phases of these threats. And recently, in the press, and even broader, people started to discuss the quoted Volodymyr Zelensky, and he's mentioning Budapest memorandum, that we were able to keep the nuclear weapon or NATO as a security measures, and it was published all around the world. And let's be honest, the president of Ukraine wouldn't have needed to say something about it on the next meeting if we we're very careful when we're talking about the nuclear weapon. And even though I do not have any kind of issues regarding what the president has said, but if you want, you can interpret it in different ways. And that is one side. And it was so bad that it was foreseen that the head of the Russian Federation used it for his benefits with a quite of weird announcement that he will not allow that to happen. It seems like that was a reincarnation of the former Soviet leaders, and in the seventh time, Sarmat did not launch in the air, in the mind, and they cannot copy it from SS-18, which was built in Pivden-Mash plant. So I think that is ridiculous. But nevertheless, they use this quote. For some part of the world, Ukraine has raised somewhere on their attention in the informational space, and Ukraine can create nuclear weapon, they can return its nuclear status, even though the status is something different. Okay, let's create some nuclear weapon, and that was something that was actually used a lot all around media. In Ukraine, we have another wave. Let's be honest, many Ukrainians, considering this asymmetric war with the Russian Federation, they are willing to consider this option. Let's think about some weapon which can stop Ukraine from getting destroyed. So there are two sides which are given pure fuel in these fires. So, and also speaking of the nuclear threats, what kind of initiatives we have to undertake? So I will have a few questions. First of all, the question which might be disappointing for some of them, and I think that the answer is quite clear, but nevertheless, I would like you to answer this question. The question consists of two parts: whether Ukraine is able, at the moment, in some way to produce nuclear weapon, and the second question, if there is actually a need, and maybe some official data, what do you think about it? Whether it's possible, considering the current situation. Thank you. Well, my answer is no. It's impossible. Why? It is impossible today. When there are any kind of explanations of some problems, I start with international law. Today, Ukraine, according to the international law and ratified by Ukraine international documents, first of all, that is the agreement on the nuclear weapon, Ukraine is not a nuclear weapon country. And if Ukraine moves towards the nuclear status, it means that we are facing the international sanctions from our partners who are providing us the weapon and economical and financial support. And the answer is nobody thinks that it's possible considering the situation we have in Ukraine. The second one is regarding the technologies of the production of the nuclear weapon. As a specialist, I can tell you that in Ukraine, the potential which was used in the Soviet times, and Ukraine was really very actively using their both intellectual and material and scientific resources, Ukraine was very much connected to the production of the nuclear weapon during Soviet Union times. We had uranium, the most approachable, that is Жовті води in Dnipropetrovska Oblast, and the first nuclear weapon was produced from Ukrainian uranium. So the first weapon was made with Ukrainian uranium. We also had the scientific institutions which were working on the technologies of the development of the enriched uranium. We had Pivden-Mash plant as a production of the carriers of these weapon, and as you know, they had the biggest range, Pivdenmash. The Russian Federation cannot repeat these technologies, and we also had in Kharkiv the institute, which was working on the systems of the control of the rockets. So all the components for the production of the nuclear weapon were present in Ukraine. But after Ukraine refused from nuclear weapons, after it has approved the relevant decisions on the level of the international legislation, the arsenal of these weapons was decreasing. And Vice President of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma, who was the director of Pivdenmash, was not able to provide the full function of this entity, which was able to produce any kind of missiles, not with the nuclear weapon, but the normal ones. And that was something that was discussed when we were talking about negotiations of getting non-nuclear status. So scientific potential of Ukraine doesn't give us the opportunity to get to return our nuclear status. Another important component. It's not a secret that the entire territory of Ukraine is accessible for the Russian missiles. So in order to try to build the nuclear explosive component and then the carrier, we have to place the plants at the place which will be inaccessible for the Russian weapons. Considering the craziness of Putin and their parliament, which threatens us with the nuclear weapon, we can even consider that against the complex which we will develop in Ukraine, so everything that is related to the nuclear weapon, they can also use nuclear weapons. So considering speaking from the point of view of the international community, I do not think that there is going to be the big resilience. And you know that Israel was threatening to use their nuclear weapon in case there will be the threat to the Israel as a state. So the same thing can happen in Putin's case with our nuclear program. And probably not the last thing, not the last component to this petty picture. It's not a secret that in the corridors of couloirs of Ukrainian government, there are lots of those who work for the Russian task forces and the Russian Federation. So the holes in the security system of Ukraine, that is the problem which lasts since the collapse of the Soviet Union, and until now it is not resolved. So as soon as Ukraine will just start thinking on this problem, the Russian Federation will already know about it. And of course, they are going to use this factor to, first of all, block the cooperation of Ukraine with the West to continue the war with the Russian Federation. Thank you for this explanation. I think that is quite exhausting, but nevertheless, we are talking about today. So let's talk about the situation which can occur, because the Russian Federation as a nuclear country was not stopped, and that did not become the common task, not only for Ukraine but for the rest of the world. Even though these kind of nuclear threats are against the international convention, it's not only according to memorandum. Though Budapest memorandum is a weak document, but nevertheless it works. There are conventions that you cannot threat with the weapons, and everything continues. So let's imagine so that nuclear club, after it will see what happens to Ukraine. So let's not discuss why it happened. So Ukraine gave up the nuclear weapon, and also there are bombers and carriers, and and it was under attack. So what is the conclusion for the countries which formally do not tell about their desire to have the nuclear weapon? How, unlike Northern Korea and Iran, Israel we've mentioned today, and the answer of Golda Meir, even though there was no other official answer. So Golda Meir, so she says we do not have the nuclear weapon, but if needed, we will use it. Meaning that the nuclear club, which consists of 5 countries at the moment, and who have signed the Budapest memorandum, and 2 more added in various ways, France and the Republic of China. So it can happen that Pakistan, India, maybe Israel will legalize their nuclear weapon, and those who are on the threshold, they can do that. And then we come to the point when, hypothetically, but we cannot forget it, the tactical nuclear weapon is used. So that is something that we should not ignore, in my opinion. So I mean, like the Russian Federation or the Northern Korean weapon. And what happens in the rest of the world? Are these countries going to wait, or this club is going to increase? And if the situation will change, what should Ukraine do? If at the moment we do not have this opportunity, and later we have the role of nuclear weapons, and the world is moving the other direction. So lots of things were destroyed. Lots of memorandums and agreements were are not efficient, and luckily we have some kind of basis, but nevertheless it's decreasing. So if we're not talking about it today, can we hypothetically talk about it in the future if we will have the relevant resources? So we can conclude on the Budapest memorandum, because it appeared to be that the parties signing this agreement at the moment, they are saying that that are not the security guarantees, and that is just the guarantee, the security assurance, and the format of the Budapest memorandum does not meet the practice when the state guarantee the legal liability on the security guarantees to the country. So this document was not ratified. This document was not the basis of the national legislation of the parties which signed this memorandum, and therefore it cannot be have the mission of guaranteeing Ukraine the security, and that is how it is interpreted in the US at the moment. And when the full-scale war in Ukraine started, some countries started to observe. So the countries which understood that Putin is not just announced the special operation. This special operation was announced. That is the absolute destruction of Ukraine as a state and Ukrainians. Considering these challenges, the parties signing the Budapest memorandum, they should have activated their consultative mission as it is foreseen in the provisions of the memorandum, so that with joint efforts they could mitigate the threat of destroying Ukraine as a state. And it didn't happen. And I'm not going to dive deep into the details why it happened like this. Is it the fault of the US and the UK, which signed the Budapest memorandum, or maybe it is the mistake of Ukrainian side, which did not use the options provided within the Budapest memorandum. But I can state that the result is that Budapest memorandum did work out as the international act, which not maybe guarantees, but provide some security. And at the moment, there is a Stockholm Institute of the World Problems, and they have developed their conclusions. How did nuclear programs started very rapidly on the improvement of the nuclear weapons, and we have mentioned that there are 5 countries, but that is just one of the components. And how fast did the situation start to change in the world regarding the nuclear weapon? Ukrainian non-proliferation of nuclear weapons stopped development of nuclear weapons all around the world, because when we, as a country with the 3rd biggest, highest potential of the nuclear weapon, because before that 15 countries were working on their own nuclear weapon, and the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons by Ukraine has stopped these programs. And the second thing, it is obvious that some countries were even destroying their nuclear weapons, even though it happened before. So, I mean, like South African Republic, Brazil, Argentina was trying to do the same. So, what is important here? Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons allowed to continue the Treaty of the Non-Proliferation, which ended in 1995. And the chances to prolongate it were not in place, because some countries were the part we had their own national nuclear weapon programs. But after the issue with Ukraine has resolved, Ukraine got the non-nuclear status. The countries calmed down, and they decided that thermonuclear war will not happen, that the world will move towards destroying the biggest world threats, and they stopped their nuclear programs. And what has happened after 2022? There is a statistics that modernization of the nuclear explosive weapons, the countries have increased the expenditures on $2.7 trillion. So that is a huge money which the world is investing in the development of the new, more destructive nuclear weapons. The second thing, which is unfortunate, not only the problematic countries like Iran or Northern Korea, and also democratic countries, they started on the political level the discussion, the national discussion on whether we should think on our own nuclear status. And I'm talking now about Japan, Germany. Some political parties started to raise this question on nuclear weapons. Not only they do not want to rely on the US. So we can say that Pandora box is open. The nuclear Pandora box is open, and the world starts a new nuclear phase. And what will be the result? I think that nobody can foresee that. So I agree with you that there is a new stage. And the most interesting thing here is that we are not planning to produce nuclear weapons. But generally speaking, why don't we have the right for the nuclear umbrella, nuclear protection? Look what is happening. The Russian Federation, nuclear country, has provided Ukraine the guarantees which it did not fulfill according to the Budapest memorandum. What does it mean? That the negative guarantees which the Russian Federation gave to Ukraine on non-using nuclear weapons at the moment is worth nothing. The other countries in the Budapest Memorandum say that there are the negative guarantees. What does it mean? So for Ukraine, it seems very cynic, but unfortunately, that is the result of the work we did that time. China announced in Vanin, he was advisor of Xi Jinping, and the moment he is the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs of the RCP, he answered the journalist whether you are going to support your guarantees regarding Ukraine. He said, yes, we are going to do that. And it means that the RCP will not attack Ukraine with nuclear weapons. So in this context, it is considered by the countries, but not the Russian Federation. So the Russian Federation, in fact, has got rid of these obligations themselves. Moreover, recently in their doctrine, they have changed that if it's the war with non-nuclear Ukraine, but also with any kind of support of the nuclear country like the UK, the US, or France, in this case, they can use nuclear weapons. So that is, I'm sorry, but that's not just doesn't meet the international legislation. So the Russian Federation, and it's destroying, and now the North Korea is going to support it, and Iran was helping, assisting them. Not only them, they have destroyed the order which continues decaying, and the next part of decay will be in the system of the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. And as a result, after the nuclear so Kazakhstan and Belarus also had the great potential. They have also decreased. So Kazakhstan and Belarus, they got the nuclear umbrella. Let's not forget it. And they went another way. As they started to cooperate politically with the Russian Federation, they got the Russian Federation nuclear umbrella. Taiwan has the promises at the moment only, but the South Korea already got the nuclear umbrella from the US. So the separate agreement with the US have added to the previous agreement, security agreement. The US is obliged to support South Korea with nuclear umbrella in case it will be attacked. The Europe, you mentioned Germany. Well, actually, all the NATO countries, they are under nuclear umbrella at the moment. And the US, and also the US, which has in Poland and the rest of the countries, they have nuclear umbrella. And also France, so the UK, they have their nuclear umbrella. And as for Japan, Japan is under the US nuclear umbrella. So Ukraine is not just without nuclear weapons, but without this umbrella as well. So my question is, the right to get this nuclear protection, do we have it? And whether it's worth to raise the question with our partners or on the 30th anniversary of Budapest memorandum on reconsideration of the mutual obligation. So maybe, I do understand that it's very complicated from the political and diplomatic point of view, but the approach, whether maybe it's time to remind about this situation once again and to remind that we did not refuse from nuclear umbrella. There were some things written there, but as it was at that time. But maybe we should not think about our nuclear weapons, but about the agreements with the countries about the nuclear umbrella. That can be the UK, the US. Yes, I can agree with you absolutely that Ukrainian state management did not use the opportunities of Budapest memorandum in this part, the part which is foreseen by memorandum on the consultations on the level of the partners signing the memorandum on the national security, national integrity, and the threat of ceasing to exist. This document had to be activated back in 2014 when the Russian Federation started aggression in the Ukraine and annexed the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. At that time, the Parliament of Ukraine, Verkhovna Rada, in March, they have addressed their message to the parliaments of the world, namely the US, to activate the Budapest Memorandum, acting Minister Dyshytsa not only uses message but also he managed to achieve that in April 2014 there were the first consultations, the UK, the US, and Ukraine, and there were the agreements because the Russian Federation was not presented on this meeting, and they agreed that the negotiations on what the Russian Federation is doing, and in fact the aggression of the Russian Federation towards Ukraine, which completely meets doesn't meet the requirements of UN statute, because there are the provisions that the state which annexed any part of the territory of the sovereign state, according to the international law, gets the status of the aggressor state, and therefore the country which suffers from aggression has the right, legal right, to address all the countries in the world with the requirement to support and to cease the aggression. That is how it is interpreted by the UN when it comes to the act of aggression. So considering Budapest memorandum, the UN statute, but the state management should have moved in this direction which you are talking about now, meaning that first it concerned the countries, then Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast or Donbass, then the nuclear threats, full-scale aggression. So considering the fact that since 2014 these kind of consultations were happening between Ukraine, the US, and the UK, I think that the result would have been different, and I'm confident that in this case we wouldn't have had this full-scale aggression which Ukraine is going through. And another thing regarding this topic, so these kind of things which you've mentioned, they are not done within the press conference. So these kind of things are done confidentially. It is classified from the enemies, and nobody knows about it until the fact of signing the agreement is announced. So you were mentioning South Korea. Have we heard a lot that the US has negotiations with South Korea on providing on the territory of South Korea the nuclear umbrella, or for example Japan? So all of these are the things which are done very secretly until the legal agreement is signed and it is ratified by the parliament of the relevant countries. So the practice of work of the Ukrainian policy, when we have no agreements and nobody is talking about it, and now you're raising it on the public level, well, I think that it frightens both partners, and also this kind of practice does not meet the international practices. I can agree with you regarding this practice, but what you've mentioned right now, if you don't mind, I have another practice which both of us support when we are talking about professional and non-public. And then it appears to be that there are the evaluation that things like that were not happening. So it's not a big secret that in 2014, when we had the interim period, the hard times came to Ukraine, and then we had the legitimate president, and then it was done by the president who so there was a request of the country signing the Budapest memorandum, and at that time I was working in those government, and that time president did it. So despite the fact that at that time there were no huge nuclear threats of the Russian Federation, but nevertheless we considered the Budapest memorandum as a guarantees of sovereignty. If you go through this document, you're just reading it, and you can see that these countries guarantees assurance. It doesn't matter. Nevertheless, it is written that they are going to respond if there is a threat to the sovereignty. It's not written that it's just the negative guarantees in case of nuclear threats. unfortunately, those who were writing this document, that was not a very highly quality document. So our partners stick to that. And as a deputy minister of the foreign affairs, I was preparing the letters for President Yushchenko back in 2009, and it was the same situation. They were interpreting it. That is actually interesting. They interpreting that in different ways. In 2009, 2014, the versions were different. They were interpreting that in different ways, and we have to analyze it. And publicly, maybe we should talk a lot about this initiative publicly, but nevertheless, we have to say that these kind of initiatives were happening, and the fact that they were not public for mass media on the press conferences, that meant that unfortunately we do not have big successes here. Our partners did not want to have this dialogue, but we didn't have this kind of situation. By the way, they were saying, and that was public, you do not have nuclear threats. That was what we heard, but now we have, and now the nuclear threats we have. And let's remember what you were saying. In case nuclear threats will be in place, we will do that. So that was a key thing which was repeated for many times on the official level. So that is a time when we have to remind them about it. There is a nuclear threat. There is nuclear threatening, the rather direct violations, and that is the thing we have to do at the moment. So now I would like to ask you, so it is interrelated issues. So Russian nuclear threats, constant threats, they are constant because some official representatives of the states are constant, and these people are called the clowns, even though they have official level. And for example, the head of the new position, the head of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, then they are saying that we will turn Washington into ashes, we will turn Warsaw into ashes, and that is a deputy of Putin, in fact, the head of the Security Council of the Russian Federation. They were not much response. In 2022, it was said that a very famous phrase. The head of CRU said that there was a discussion with the Minister of Defense, and they said that we will show how the U.S. respond. That is in the book. So I am referring to Goodford's book, The War. But in the U.S., it is considered to be 99% truth. So in 2022, the U.S. gave the signal to the Russian Federation. What kind of signal, we do not know. The speculations, we are not going to spread these speculations. Different scenarios were named, but nevertheless, they warned it. And then they tried mini contours. And unlike Sarmant, which is Wunderwaffe of Putin, it struck in 13,000 kilometers and 13,000 meters, and it's enough kilometers. And so why? Why Putin? I don't understand why Putin uses these threats, but why people are listening to him? Well, there is a kind of nuclear ping-pong game. The countries which understand the nuclear potential of the Russian Federation, that even they were not able to test them, and I've heard nothing from 1996, and now the U.S. has a new technology which does not require the physical tests, and nevertheless, it is enough to evaluate, as they say. So I don't understand that it's some kind of simulations made through the system which is available at the moment, technological system. So they have the missile. And many missiles. They have the technology which allows them to improve their technologies. The Russian Federation has nothing. And every time, and we allow that, and the US allow that, and the UK and France allows Putin to publicly use it. And now, before BRICS, Putin did the same. He did not just say that it's they have the biggest opportunities, the biggest perspectives, and Lavrov in the UN says, "Are you going to go to war with the nuclear states?" So why they are so reserved, even though in fact they are not even close to the sufficiency they state. So first, I would like to make a few clarifications on the Budapest memorandum you've mentioned, the Poroshenko's message to the partners and the response. Well, Mr. Valeriy, we have to consider our relations in the context after our independence. So that is something I mentioned in my book, and it's very important that the US from the very beginning was responding to the reaction of the Verkhovna Rada Parliament of Ukraine on nuclear disarmament. And Wisner, when meeting the ambassador of the Republic of Belarus, sent the message that the US is ready to support Ukraine in the process of the nuclear disarmament, and that instead of the nuclear weapon, the US suggests the nuclear umbrella you were mentioning, Mr. Valeriy, and the membership in NATO in 1992. But in January 1993, the Ukrainian delegation, on behalf of Ukraine, which is headed by the Deputy Minister of the Foreign Affairs in Washington, they were asking for another thing. They were asking for the paper proofs of these guarantees, and they were surprised, and they were even not willing to talk about it until they got the agreement, the additional explanation that they needed for the members of the Parliament of Ukraine to stimulate them to vote for START 1, and the other one of which were considered in the Parliament of Ukraine that time. So this kind of ambiguous position of Ukraine led to some certain level lack of trust in the relations between the Western partners in Ukraine. And when in 1993 they passed to Ukrainian parliament delegation, which was at that time in the US, a complex plan not of the movement to the non-nuclear status, but also the plan the International Fund of Disarmament of Ukraine, that is a strategic cooperation with the US. And at that time, what has happened in Ukraine? In Ukraine, we had the substitution of the head of the delegation in the Russian Federation on nuclear disarmament, and the next head decided to pass all the warheads, nuclear warheads, to the Russian Federation, despite the fact that the new president Clinton, in July 1993, had an agreement with Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Federation, to make these negotiations not mutual but trilateral, not bilateral but trilateral. The US, Ukraine, and the Russian Federation. And the results are absolutely clear for me. That would have been another type of disarmament, that was NATO participation of Ukraine and the collective protection which we are discussing at the moment. So in this sense, when we are talking about lack of trust of the partners, we have to consider all the context of the relations of the political management with the West, which was perceived by the West traditionally, or with some certain lack of trust, or they were considering them as sad. I mean, that now I'm talking about ex-communists, which were still in the government at that point. So that is clear, Mr. Yuriy, and I was urging everyone to read the book, and you're telling everything. So you can read about the history of this episode in the story. I'm very sorry, but the Western partners are not willing to work with us. Yes, it's true, they do not want to do that, because what you're talking about 90s is one thing. That is a thing which ended in 1993, when the US, as you have mentioned, that they were saying that the position of the US quite often, because of lack of trust, it has changed, and now it is different. So let's admit that no offers or opportunities to talk to the US in the same manner. We didn't have it in 2014, but nevertheless, the situation was had to make it closer, and also in 2009. And I'm reassuring you as a person who was a part of this process at that time. So the speculation, which was spread by Mr. Smishko, who say that in 2014, when I'm responding to his reacting on his messages, because he was mentioning me that we did not but we asked and we have the answers. And these answers, unfortunately, and like big unfortunate, because when Yanukovych has given what the last things we had for being on the photo with the president of the US, and they brought it from Kharkiv, 63 kilos. So nothing is left. And is it about trust? No, of course it's about lack of trust. And the US continued. They didn't trust us, and I agree, because I didn't trust Yanukovych. Personally, I didn't trust Yanukovych, and of course it led to some certain my political actions, and I was a left position. But yes, they were actually they didn't trust him, and they took everything they could, and they said that they were studying plutonium, but nevertheless, at that point, we gave up everything. Even the small things were given up. So, of course, Luhar, Senator Luhar, we were talking to him and how he was talking about these nuclear weapons. I'm not going to return to this. I would like to say that the position of the US, I agree with you, it has changed because of our behavior in 1990s. And moreover, I can tell you, when I read your book, I can see that that's not about communism. It's also the part of Ukrainian patriots, but who didn't have this kind of strategical perspective of the future. But we are talking about nowadays. And if we talk about the times we did not use our opportunities, we had lots of episodes like that. But talking about nowadays, the Russian Federation, why informational sense, which is also very important in Ukraine people, and I can see that constantly when there is nuclear threats, people start to think about it, to discuss it. Nuclear threats is something very serious in the informational area, even though they are not going to be applied. So I will clarify the question. So I think that the experts do not consider these kind of threats seriously. But what is your opinion? So what can be next after these steps, after they change the doctrine? What can we expect from them? And whether we should be serious about these, not maybe serious, but before... should we consider that the stage when the Russian Federation is ready to use their weapons, like the Europe does, that we should not escalate the situation because the Russian Federation is a nuclear state, and that is repeated. And from the history, we know that the war, for example, the war in Korea, when we were reminded from time to time, so this scenario, German, Korean scenario, so it was made with the support of the nuclear countries. From the one hand, it was the Soviet Union, which had the US, which had nuclear weapons 1945, and 1949, the Soviet Union. And at that time, they had the same war, and nothing was used. No weapons were used, no nuclear weapons. And now, any kind of your cough is reflected as the huge and everyone in the cabinet is scared. So is it the desire of the nuclear club to play nuclear ping pong of escalations and threats, or is it the real opportunity for the Russian Federation to use the nuclear weapons against Ukraine? So personally, I do not believe that any kind of head of the nuclear state will be able to press this red button. Why? Because everyone understands that aid means self-destruction. Not only of your opponent, but also of yourself. Considering the fact that Putin and his paranoid behavior, he is afraid of death most of all, then the order like that, which can lead to his death, I think that none of the psychologists in the world can say that he can do that. Well, that is speaking of the personal characteristics. And now speaking of the thermonuclear war. All analytical military analyticians say that the nuclear war is impossible because it means the end of the period when human being can live on these earth. And therefore, this terminology and these scary stories is used to slow down aggression and to protect the interests of the nuclear states. And you can read lots of articles about that. And the recent Mark Rutte has General Secretary, when he got the position, he said that responding to these scary stories of Putin is not correct, because according to the new Secretary General, there is not going to be at the time when the order will be given. But why they are afraid of the Russian Federation? That is not the question, Mr. Valeriy, which concerns only nuclear disarmament, but also let's consider the other components. And despite the promises in a peaceful way, as the president of the US, Mr. Biden, said, of the health sanctions will force the aggressor to stay in peace with Ukraine, they were trying to do something with crude oil, with gas, some sanctions. They were trying to cut them from SWIFT. But as you see, everything was stopped on half a way, or even 1/3 of way of these sanctions. And the same thing concerned the other aspects. Why nuclear terrorism, which started after the occupation of Chernobylsk nuclear power plant and then Zaporizhzhia power plant, why it was not didn't got any kind of sanctions, why Rosatom was not sanctioned? Because the US, France, the UK, they still got the materials for the nuclear energy. The same thing about titanium. 80% of military complex is supported by titanium, and Ukrainian titanium is supporting Russian Federation. So the materials are taken from Ukraine, and then the American military complex cannot refuse from the Russian Federation, because for many years Ukraine, the US was not allowed to use Ukrainian titanium. And I'm telling that as an ex-minister, which was working not only on the ecological issues, but also natural resources. The US was trying to reach our resources, strategic resources, for many years, and therefore the West depends on the Russian Federation. And as soon as the West will be more radical about its sanctions, not even military sanctions, but just normal sanctions, they might face huge problems, and their economy and military complex will be under threat. The sad thing is the other thing. It is almost 3 years in the beginning of the full-scale war, and these gas flows were stopped. But as for the other sources, not much was done. What should have been done for the West, if the West wanted to use sanctions against the Russian Federation. And as for the military component, and why do we have this kind of play on the nuclear threats, we have to consider the other factor, the nations, the population of the countries for whom the nuclear war is the end of the state. And these kind of threats, they destabilize the situation in the states, and also the Ukraine's partners states. And Putin knows all of these things, and he uses not only threats efficiently, but he combines it with PSYO operations or informational war, which is ongoing not only against Ukraine, but also against the Western countries. It has an impact on the behavior of the electorate, because every 4 or 5 years the new elections take place, and the moods have changed. The situation has changed in Germany, in Austria, when the radical rights are in power. Luckily, they cannot establish their government, but nevertheless, that are the first signals that the governments, by supporting Ukraine, they are losing popularity, and non-responding these kind of things is something that no political party can avoid. And therefore, if Putin says something, if he starts threatening us, the same moment the entire world starts responding and reacting. Okay, it's clear. The only thing I would like to add, if you don't mind, that speaking of France and the UK, I'm not able to say anything about the states, but uranium supplies from the Russian Federation to the US is they're quitting, and the law it will be in place they have 1 year to fulfill this law, and there are the resources of titanium in the US, and the US can have the access to the titanium. They did not want to give it they did not want the Russian Federation to control it, but the recent sale of these capacities to the state, which is so called Ukrainian partner, but it's still not very much clear for me, and that is a part of the other discussion. But nevertheless, I understood your hint regarding the sanctions. But to be serious, when we're talking seriously about the sanctions, we need to answer internally what is the crude oil and gas through Ukraine. What are the new gas and crude oil in Hormel, and now it is going to go to Europe. Why? Because we have allegations towards Europe when we are supplying to the Czech Republic, to Hungary, who are absolutely directly against Ukraine. And the next thing, what will happen? But there is a topic for the discussion. Toliati, Odessa, Ammiakoprovod entity, and I hope that it's not the same scheme which worked for decades, which is developing for decades. Odessa port, so there is the ammonium and is delivered to this port from the Russian Federation. So that is a tactics of the Ukrainian government is dangerous, in my opinion. I'm not going to go into details. I do understand why it happens in this way, and I do understand that it's not just the episodes. That are the shifts of the approaches, and just consider this situation. But it doesn't concern the nuclear disarmament. But nevertheless, it shows how the decisions are made here. And I would like, concluding this part, I would like to ask you to give us your recommendation. So if I came to conclusion that technologically we cannot do that and economically we cannot do that, if we get financial support for the support of the country, for it not to bankrupt, in this case, during the war, we have no capacity. And what you've said, that is under the full control, let's be honest. So, nothing to discuss here, but nevertheless, if Ukraine became the country which gave the opportunity, which was the trigger for the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons in the world. So from time to time, it was mentioned that the country which got rid of nuclear weapons, what should we do? Should we become the leader in this discussion on nuclear non-proliferation? And you see that the big nuclear players, they are closing up these discussions. So on the contrary, they started to improve the numbers, the quality, and the US and the Russian Federation, they are doing the same. The Russian Federation is not able to respond, but the US can. So should we become the leader in the world? And maybe we need to to remind about this story, or maybe there are some other initiatives which Ukraine has to undertake when it comes to nuclear weapons. What context is beneficial for Ukraine, and what, in your opinion, we could do and not doing at the moment? So I think that Ukraine has run out of its limit to be the leader of the nuclear world, and now all of these horrible pictures from Ukraine, where the cities are turned into ashes, where every day we got the strikes on our energy sector and civilian infrastructure. All of these things has proved that no non-nuclear status can protect you from aggression, and therefore I think for Ukraine there is only one way, that is to enhance ourselves. First of all, yes, indeed, the potential of Ukraine allows us to move not only towards the nuclear weapons in the future, not in 1 week, as he said, like one of the experts said in his kitchen. So I do not try these kind of titles without names, without anything, so it's irony. Nevertheless, Ukraine has intellectual and material resources to return to production of various missiles with different range, with different parameters. Something that was discussed in 1990s on the meetings of the Security Council. Ukraine can produce conventional weapons in big amounts and similar things. What do we need for that? We need the sufficient economy which can provide for this development. And when it is said that Israel or Pakistan is quite a poor country, but nevertheless they became the nuclear country, and it is said that some developer of the nuclear program, she said, even if we will be eating grass, we will be developing these nuclear weapons because we need it to protect Pakistan. And speaking of Ukrainian potential, it is in place. But what do we not have in Ukraine? We do not have the policy which will quit corruption on all of the levels and which can provide Ukraine with a sufficient financing to become stronger separately. And the last number, 3 days ago, there was a meeting, the governmental meeting between government and business, and the questions of the lack of gap of taxes in the budget, so-called gray zone, black zone. And very interesting numbers were mentioned. According to their evaluation, that are the governmental evaluations, Ukraine loses incomes to the budgets as taxes, 500 billion hryvnias. The budget of Ukraine for 2024 is around 2-3 billion. And what is that? About a quarter. So I think that these numbers are very underestimated. But if we consider these resources are incredible. 25% of the income could have been redirected for the development of the weapons and the rest of the things to make ourselves stronger. And another number, which is very interesting and very interesting. Blinken has mentioned them in 2020 on the Vilnius conference on the economy support of Ukraine, where Mr. Zelensky has presented the plan of reforming the total reform of Ukraine, and he was asking money for this program. And Mr. President Blinken said that we will give you the money only after you will take 33% of that, which is stolen by oligarchs in Ukraine. And I have calculated how much is that. And it turned out $40 billion. So that are the resources which can be used to make Ukraine stronger. And the second question is the question we've mentioned today. Ukraine has to change the approaches to their international relations and increasing qualifications and international practices. Ukraine, and I'm quite sure that in the perspective, Ukraine can get the nuclear umbrella. Ukraine can get, and I'm quite confident about that as well, the agreement, not by becoming the member of NATO, where there are long procedures of consensus and to approve some principal provisions. Ukraine can get similar bilateral agreements of our national security, and we were mentioning Israel, we were mentioning Japan, South Korea, and all of these things are open doors for us. When we will sign the peace agreement, sooner or later it will happen that the countries who guarantee us the Russian Federation will not attack during the next 50 years, they have to undertake these obligations, the obligation they have with the other countries, which provide them security, military security at the moment. And it's we have the similar situation, the Israel war, which goes at the same time, where two fleets of the US with the nuclear weapons, and not only nuclear weapons, they are striking Iranian missiles. And all of these are things which are accessible for Ukraine, but nevertheless, it will happen under the other conditions, under relations with the Western partners and the different internal activities, which actually retains the West when including their assistance, when everything that goes to the pockets of the Ukrainian corruptioners. We will not be able to resolve this problem with the corruption, but when the war is financed from the budget and we get only the money for the reunions, and asking more money for the missile programs is not supported, and 800 million is allocated for the drone production. We really appreciate the support from the US. But finalizing this meeting, I would like to add and respond to what you said about efficiency. Well, absolutely right. Why am I asking about the initiatives? Because I think that we have lost the speed, and we have the gaps. We have the gaps in our work in Vienna, that is the delegations which you were the part of. One for 12 years, we did not have these opportunities, and we have to quit with this inefficiency. The Russian diplomat meets Grossi all the time. They have dinners together. They are meeting together. They make decisions together, and nevertheless, we have no representative in Vienna. And moreover, the diplomats, in fact, they were expelled, and there was the will to remove the diplomats, Ukrainian diplomats at all. So I think we have to find the representative for Vienna, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs have to be in the delegations. If they are not, so I think that we can place a diplomat instead of Minister of Energy. So I recently read the first committee and the statement of the Russian Federation, the provision nuclear weapons, the first committee of 79th session. So he says different things, but nevertheless, my attention was drawn to one statement, very interesting statement. He says there that the US, and the Europe, and all of these things, but the key thing here, which is mentioned in this provision, is that the states which have nuclear weapons have not to avoid nuclear war in confrontation, also confrontation between them on the basis of the mutual recognition of the interests, I'm translating, and concerns in the area of insecurity. So the Russian Federation states that we're nuclear, just to forget about the support of Ukraine. We are nuclear states. And Xi Jinping says, yes, I'm ready to share the world. And it's not very well developed when it comes to the nuclear weapons. So it's a very cynic game, and we should not allow that. With all my respect to our partners, we have our own interests, national interests, and they are different from all nuclear clubs ones. Unfortunately, we have absolutely different situation, and therefore I think it is absolutely fair to have this discussion, despite the fact that you're saying that it's that it's closed the discussion on the treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. So Belarus has refused from their non-nuclear status. So the statements are official. The Russian Federation said that they already placed nuclear weapons on their territory. So let's not go into the details whether they moved it or not. But nevertheless, the Russian Federation will not give the nuclear weapons to them. They are going to control everything themselves. But in the North, we will have nuclear weapons even closer to us. So once again, that are our partners, and we are moving to NATO. But from the east and from the west, we are surrounded by nuclear warheads. And I'm not talking about strategic nuclear weapons, even tactical ones. The distance is very close for the tactic nuclear attack, and the fact that they are able to use nuclear energy infrastructure in Zaporizhia NPP, which is still under control of this ape with a grenade. So the nuclear threat is in place, but at the moment they are in the framework. They are like around our nuclear objects, Chernobylska and Zaporizhska nuclear power plants, and nevertheless we have the threats towards our power plants. For example, Pівденно-Українська nuclear power plant, they are striking the transformators. So I do not think that we have to consider these threats the way how the U.S. interpret them, but considering our statements, I think we have to look for better formulations, for better wording, and that means that we need to have professionals in place, and that are the people who have to listen to those who have to be heard, who know this question really well, and those who write to the president, or who include, by the way, the Munich speeches a few days before the full-scale war. That was some wording was interesting. So that is a very sensitive issue, and also we need to be professional regarding it. So I'm for the efficient approaches. So even speaking of the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, I think that there are some options which we can use regarding the threats which can occur, which are occurring. So it's not something that can actually help us because we lost our nuclear weapons. But you say that it's a Pandora box and you cannot return the time back. But maybe we have to remind with some initiatives about the questions we were talking about today. So I think that if there are any questions, yes, we have the questions. So we have around 15 minutes for the questions. So just a moment, you will get the mic. Please present yourself. Petro Kanano, expert on the NATO membership. A small comment and the question to Mr. Yuriy. First of all, I would like to thank personally Mr. Valeriy Chaly and Crisis Media Center, Ukraine Crisis Media Center, for initiating this important discussion. The discussion which shows an example to the other NGOs on how to fulfill the provisions of the strategy of communications on the Euro-Atlantic communications in the period till 2030, approved in 2021 in August, and continuing the offer to engage more diplomats in Vienna. We have a good example, the appointment of the diplomat Tochitsky Mykola on the position of the Minister of the Culture, which was called Minister of Culture and Minister of Culture. Now it is Minister of Culture and Strategic Development. And now supporting your statement that we have to raise the qualification of the diplomats, then there is a question to Mr. Valeriy. Considering the fact that Budapest memorandum is in the chart on the special partnership between NATO and Ukraine, which was signed in 1997. And this chart, as you know, since 1999, is the part of NATO acquis, which is also signed in the action plan. Do you agree that President Zelensky made a correct move, that he started, as you say, he started reminding the partners about the fulfillment of the documents which are mentioned in their NATO acquis? Well, I was trying to answer this question in the process of our discussion with Mr. Valeriy, because the partners, we need not just to talk to them on the stage in front of press, but we need to have the deep cooperation with them on all of the levels. And first of all, it concerns the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I would like to return to the beginning of the notice, when the discussion on the strategy of Ukraine to the non-nuclear status was happening on the different platforms. There was civil sector, diplomatic, military sectors, and these discussions were held on a very high level. So there was a lot of people who understood this topic, who went into depth, who were negotiating with the US. For example, the conference, which was conducted in the US and which was held in the US in 1992 on the nuclear security, global nuclear security, and the role of Ukraine and its initiatives, allowed me to meet the senators and congressmen, and there were lots of them, and they were representatives of all nuclear states. And answering my question, I was asking the senator, if Ukraine will move towards non-nuclear status, why do we need to destroy the launch mines if we are not producing the nuclear warheads, and we are going to destroy strategic carriers? But why do we need to spend these huge resources to destroy the mines? And he looked at me and said, no issues, just make it as an amendment to the agreement, to the START one, and we will support it. Regarding Ukraine, yes, you do not need to destroy these mines, because destroying these launching mines was relevant for the Soviet Union. The US could not control the launch of the nuclear warheads, but the US could control destroying the launching mines, and in this way they could control the situation between the Soviet Union and the US in this way. And the conditions for Ukraine were different. So the West was open for many questions on the cooperation with Ukraine. I'm not going to repeat that. And in that time, when Verkhovna Rada Parliament of Ukraine has approved the decision different from what Kravchuk has suggested, and the Minister of Defense of US said, we understood everything. The nuclear warheads will be removed from the strategic bombers, and in your shelters, and you have 5 of them, and they are going to capture, they are under international control, and we will help you to reuse them as a peaceful atom. Why didn't we use this option? In this case, the Russian Federation could do nothing if the US was able to contact Ukraine in this way, and Ukraine started this path of the process. But we moved in the different way. So coming back to the key question, why having the huge opportunities for the development of the cooperation with the West, that time government did not use this potential. Why at the moment, even after we went this 30-year way, even though we have the experience of democracy development, nevertheless we have the issues with the West, because the West doesn't like us when, in front of mass media, the governments are arguing, and they do not accept this kind of resolution of the conflicts. And answering your question whether Zelensky does it right or not, Mr. Yuriy has mentioned the Munich conference, where 4 days before the full-scale war, the president has stated that if immediately we will not activate the Budapest memorandums, we are leaving Budapest memorandums with all the consequences. And what would be the consequences? Nuclear status for Ukraine, even though it is unrealistic statement, and even nowadays, so we cannot return to the nuclear status fast. Yes, that is something that we were explaining, that when the president states something, in this case, it's very easy to... So it can be done not by the president, and that shouldn't be the president who does it. There is a parliament. Why the parliament don't have the readings dedicated to the annual signing anniversary of the Budapest memorandum? And I know that there are no resistance from the committees, but the thing is that there should be some officials from the executive branch of power, and they have the committee hearings and better parliament hearings. Why the role of the parliament as why it is used as a tool, and even the enemies do that, and in fact we are not using these tools. So you've mentioned about reminding the partners. Well, you can remind it in different ways. If we are talking about the informational space, that is my personal opinion. I worked in the US, and you can mention the closed meeting between the president of Ukraine and the president of the US, and I do not think I wouldn't have supported this side, even though at some point the president of the US has published the letter of President Zelensky publicly, and nothing stopped him. And we remember that in this letter, Zelensky was mentioning some security aspects. So I agree with that we need to remind, but I think that we should not use the president position as the ultimate way to remind. So there are some things which we are working on for many years, the department, the Minister of Defense, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So I want to say that that is not just a task for the diplomats in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That is a broader issue which appears between Ministries of Energy, between Ministries of Defense. So I just don't even want to touch this question of the commissions and what is the situation with the negotiations on these topics inside Ukraine. We have to answer ourselves. And also the approach. Approach is a bit different thing, but nevertheless, this kind of approach, it's not very correct. When something is done with the partners and publicly announced, but there is no decision inside the country. And, for example, there is that is something that is supported in Ukraine. It sounded very well. Ukrainians supported that. Let's show them their place and nuclear weapon. And, for example, after the war, we will send our veterans to defend the other countries, for example, NATO. So who has asked our veterans or the parliament whether they agree? And we are going to give titanium, uranium sources to the foreign representatives, to the countries which are protecting us. And who has asked, why don't we give the rent to for example, you're defending Pokrovsk, and if you come, you will get the percent when you return. So I'm showing you the same informational hype of how you can draw attention to these things. And it seems to me that the gap between informational space and the reality is too big. And we have to return something that is considered to be inefficient because it's old. But nevertheless, many countries of the world, and me as diplomat, they are using classical countries, for example, Asian and African countries. So they work with the closed doors, and also the RCP and the US. Probably I'm surprising you. They are not reviewing everything they are discussing, and I think we have to learn how to do that. We have to learn how to talk about success when we have it. Okay, so the mic, please pass the mic. Okay, maybe one more question, and it will be 1 hour and a half, and then we will finish. Please present yourself. Roman Kuharuk, Ukrainian Club. Mr. Yuriy, me as your elector of your first cadency, I wanted to ask you, how do you feel yourself as a politician? Did you achieve what you wanted to achieve on this position? And do you regret that you did not become the General Secretary of EIV? So please answer this question first. So no, I do not think that I achieved everything I wanted, because for me, as I will be that when Ukraine will be with the borders of 1991, and Ukraine will be a democratic European country and the member of NATO. So as you can see, there are lots of things that have to be done. And as for the EIA, so we were moving towards closing the Chernobyl NPP. In the US, they closed 108 nuclear blocks. And coming back to the qualification of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs at that time, if the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine and the President of Ukraine understood the importance of the position of this position, we could have got this mandate of the General Secretary of AEI. But lack of understanding of what is national interest and what are the interests of independent Ukraine without sticking to the Russian Federation did not allow us to achieve that, to implement it. Thank you very much. I think that I would have spent more hour and a half discussing what you've raised, corruption, the state management. So that is other part of you as the politician. So you've been in the parliament for many years. So I think that we have. Thank you very much for your answer. They were very exhausting, and I really hope that it will show the importance to look for the best wording when we're talking about some certain issues. And of course, nuclear weapons is something that will be very much discussed. And of course, I would like to repeat that we would like to see this kind of discussion in the parliament. Ukraine Crisis Media Center is ready not to be just a media partner together with our permanent participants. Mr. Yuriy is for the second time with us, but also we have Mr. Hurbulin from the Academy of Ukraine, and also we have the people who worked on these issue for many years, and I think that these kind of people can be invited to the parliament hearings, and I think that meetings, and I think that that can be a very good grounds for the decisions in the parliament, because the parliament has to be the place where the discussions take place and where the common positions are made, and that will make the life of the President of Ukraine, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, their lives will be simpler. So we have to have at least a few solid events by the anniversary of signing of memorandum. So I wish you political achievements, but please do not forget about this educational work, not only through the books, but also both in Ukraine and in the world, but also through personal explanations of some things. And I really appreciate that, of some historical moments and what we are going through today, and the recommendations for the future. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to see you in our center, and I hope that this topic will help us to talk about and we'll be able to discuss optimistically this topic. And I would like to thank you that at least there is one person who can discuss this important issue. Thank you very much. We have a big audience. Thank you very much for your interest. Unfortunately, we do not have much opportunities to discuss it, but after the end of the official part, we can discuss some certain things, and you can ask your questions, and I really appreciate that you came to our Ukraine Crisis Media Center.